Joseph was sure he had been two-timed. It was obvious. What other explanation could there be? His fiancée is pregnant, and for obvious reasons, he knew he wasn't the father. So he asks her, who's the father? And she said, the Holy Spirit. Wow. There's really no choice there, is there? I mean, anybody with self-esteem and common sense is like, all right, I've got to go then. We've got to end this. And he was all set to do that. And then he had a dream. And he changed his mind. And went on with the marriage. Nikolai Copernicus, famous astronomer, believed, as everyone had for 2,000 years since the time of Aristotle, that the sun revolved around the earth. That was universally accepted. But around age 35, he looked at his formulas, and he looked through his telescope, and he looked back at his formulas, and he looked back at the telescope, and he changed his mind. The son in today's story is told by his father to do something he doesn't want to do. So he responds right away, off the cuff, shoots from the hip. Nope, no thanks. And he probably felt like a tough guy. But something happened. We don't know what it is. He reflected, he changed his mind, and the next thing you know, we have someone doing something that was not in the original plan, but showing a willingness to adapt. One of the keys of living a virtuous life is being willing to change our minds. If we are able to change our minds, we can recalibrate, adjust, get on board with the truth. But if we could never change our minds, then we would never, ever be able to take back something hurtful that we said. If we couldn't change our minds, then we could never apologize. We would just have to live with whatever it was. We could never learn something new because we would always just revert to what we thought before. We would never be able to let go of a prejudice that an earlier generation in our family held, but that doesn't fit for us. We would have to just stick with whatever we were taught as kids. Mark Twain once said, "It's not what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." It's not what we don't know that's going to be the problem. Most of the world, most of the universe, we don't know anything about. But it's what we're convinced of that's not true that is our biggest stumbling stone. We had a parishioner who died back in 2016 whose grandchildren called her Gaga. And I didn't get to know Gaga very well in her life, but I got to know a lot about her by preparing for her funeral. And one of the things that I'd heard was there were many chapters to her life, and she'd done a lot of growing and changing over the years. And so because of that, we know that she had to change her mind a lot of times. One of the things they told me that Gaga always said, whenever she was in the presence of someone who someone was criticizing, if you heard somebody, a couple people together gossiping and saying, "Oh, she's such a da-da-da, he's a na-da-da," she would always say simply, "They're not dead yet. He's not dead yet. She's not dead yet." End of conversation. That's something I really want to bring into my way of talking. That's just so true, isn't it? Why are you putting a period where God put a comma? They're not dead yet. It's never too late as long as we're alive to change our minds. And it's changing our minds that's even more important than changing our behavior, because what we think comes first. If life is like a tree, our behaviors are the leaves. They're the leaves on the tree. And if a tree has withered or brittle or dried out leaves, and it's not fall, then the problem is in the root. It's in the thinking. The roots are our thoughts. The leaves are the behaviors that come out of it. So you can glue the leaves back on the tree, but if the roots aren't healthy, it's just going to fall off once again. That's what we're hearing in that second reading from Philippians today, that we are meant to align ourselves with God and God's thoughts. If we are thinking the way God thinks, we will be right. If we are disagreeing with God, we can know for sure that we're wrong and we need to change our minds. So it's almost like this. It's almost like radio signals. There is a lot in the air that we can't see, a lot of frequencies broadcasting. And we can tune in to any of them that we want. And there is a station called, we can call it Radio Christ, that's broadcasting 24 hours a day. And the message is love and service and unity and reverence for life and cooperation and a love of harmony. But if you're like me, we get tempted by other stations. And a lot of the other stations have loud, obnoxious DJs on them. They always have breaking news that they want us to hear. And it disturbs us. It inflames our lesser passions. And we wind up going astray. The challenge of living a virtuous life is to keep adjusting back to that frequency, going back to that radio station, to thinking like Christ does, to aligning our thoughts with that broadcast, because there are so many other things we can listen to. Have you noticed all of the opinions out there in the world? No wonder there's so much static. And it's important for us to recognize that we are going to be tempted again and again to be drawn into it. So this week, we are being invited to do something that is almost, it's right on the edge of impossible. But with God, all things are possible. We are being asked to see if we can examine if we have any thoughts that ain't true. Is there something that you hold, a way of thinking, something you believe, something you've been quoted saying at the Silver Spoon or Stewart's or somewhere, that actually isn't in alignment with what God would say? Is there anything in your life that is not aligned with what God would think about this? Have you ever disagreed with someone a lot and then later figured out they weren't so wrong? They weren't so wrong. There was something there. You know what an interesting clue is? For those of us who go to church, we have an interesting clue that helps us to know where that might be. It's when something is said in church, either from the AMBO or a papal document or something the bishops say, that just sticks in our craw. We just don't like it. For almost every Catholic, there's something that the church teaches that we just don't like. That would be a really interesting place to go examine. Because it's going to happen all the time. We're starting this week the month of October, which is the month every year that we as a church look at all of those life issues that need to be addressed, how to respect life more fully. And the topic of abortion is going to be in the news in the Catholic world this month. For some people, that boils their blood. They say, oh, I hate when that happens. I hate when the church brings, why? I don't agree with that. For other people, it's not that at all. They're like, absolutely, I'm on board. But when immigration comes up, and we talk about the fact that Jesus was from a refugee family, and that the church always advocates for the rights of immigrants, ooh, that boils my blood, say some. Wouldn't it be interesting to take a snapshot of that moment and say, all right, what frequency am I listening to? What station am I tuned into that is not Radio Christ? How might I be the one who needs to adjust? How might it be that I've thought this for a long time, or I think it passionately, but I need to reconsider? One thing that's really interesting about being an American Catholic is that our political parties are not tuned in to Radio Christ. They do in some areas and not in others. And so there's a lot of people who would love to say, I'm with Radio Christ because I'm a blank. I'm a conservative or I'm a liberal. Not in this country. We don't get to do that. Our parties don't align with Radio Christ. They do their own thing. They're broadcasting their own message. So this is a really interesting time and an important time for us to think, where am I not thinking as Christ thinks? Where is the way I look at the world not in alignment with the way God looks at the world? And if you're like me and you take a really good hard look at that, it could be a real bummer because we've got a long way to go. But we're not dead yet.